You could pretend that you're back on the Lake Park volcanoes.
Growing up in Duluth, 35-year-old Laura Johnson said she'd never felt any urge to live anywhere else.
I love it here. I think it's a really sweet community. It's where I knew I wanted to raise my family.
Adopted from Korea as a baby, Johnson remembers her Twin Ports childhood fondly. Her family, mom, dad, and 2 older brothers, were all white. And there was lots of love. But the one thing they rarely talked about would one day stare back at her.
I started to feel very aware of my difference in college, being around other Asian people, and I would make it a point to not be around other Asian people. And so I think there was kind of probably some internalized oppression happening there.
She married her college sweetheart, Keith. But the questions about who she was and how she felt about Korea were getting harder to ignore. Until 4 years later, when she became pregnant with their first child.
And I had 9 months to really think about this baby and to think about how she might choose to identify racially and ethnically. And, as a product of a Korean woman and a white man, I realized that in order to kind of help her navigate some of those conversations of identity, I needed to do some of that reflection myself.
That sparked a trip back to Korea. It was the first return since her adoption. There she had time to reflect. She delighted in being able to disappear into a crowd of faces in similar body shapes. She ate delicious food, soaked up the culture, and met local Koreans whom she could share her grief about what she had lost.
For a long time, being Korean and being Asian was something to gloss over or to kind of bury deep inside, and it feels to me like something to be celebrated, not just for myself, but because I know that I have 2 little people who are watching me.
She found she wasn't alone. Korean adoptees have made up a large part of Minnesota's immigration story. Data is hard to find, but since the 80s, Korean-born Minnesotans have more than doubled to 14,000. Not all Korean-born residents were adopted, but consensus is that most in this category are. Adoptees historically have been the oldest and largest foreign-born Asian immigration wave to the state, but hiding in plain sight.
I really didn't identify myself as Korean adoptee, much less. In fact, I would forget that I wasn't Caucasian unless I looked into a mirror.
I didn't want to talk about it, and being asked questions such as, how much should your parents pay for you? Why don't you go back to your own country? How come you weren't wanted? And those things. That was my initial definition of Korean adoptee.
I am very new to identifying as Korean adoptee. I've identified as being Korean, though, for most of my life. But being a Korean adoptee, they're different things. It's this blending, and to me, it's about the journey that all of us are on.
How many of you felt invisible growing up?
Overseas adoptions from post-war Korea started as a mostly international humanitarian effort. Richard Lee, who was not adopted, has extensively studied transracial families. He says parents, especially in the 70s and 80s, rarely saw their adopted kids through a racial lens, and neither did the adoptee.
Adopting a child from South Korea does in some ways play on what later would become the model minority sort of stereotype. But there was also, on top of that, this idea that, adopting a child from another country, right, where it's carte blanche, in a sense, that's a child that can grow up in this country ostensibly as an honorary white.
That often led to complicated, even delayed racial identity. What often followed was an awakening at their midlife or later.
Sometimes it's within the Korean immigrant community and culture. Other times it's with other Korean adoptees. In some ways, it's a catch-up experience. rather than have it be a gradual development, it's kind of like dormant, and then boom, right? And so you see that happening later, and then it's a lifelong process, of course.
By gathering and speaking out, adult adoptees are reshaping narratives about adoption, including the belief that adoptees should feel grateful.
I can say, yes, I'm grateful for the family that raised me. I'm grateful for all the wonderful people in my life. I'm not grateful for the circumstances that led to my needing to be adopted. I'm not grateful for my birth mother not having a voice. I'm not grateful for the loss of culture and language.
It's the journey, and we're all on different journeys. And so I think that I think that there are shared experiences. I think that there are interesting ways in which we've all kind of moved through similar things differently. Even in that difference, there's a similarity to it. The journey, I think, has brought us together, and I think it's important that we have each other to sort of move through that, even if we are in kind of going in different ways with it. It's all still collectively the same.
Over the past year, adoptees in northern Minnesota formed a group to gather and meet each other. It's called Minnesota Arrowhead Region Korean Adoptees. Organizers have been surprised by the turnout. The group's Facebook page has swelled to 55 members. Dozens come out to events each month. The group has already helped Laura Johnson. She's now able to share her heritage with her daughter proudly.
She wrote a little book this last school year that was all about her mom. And on the last page, I think it said, one of the coolest things about her is that she's Korean. And my heart just soared because, that was never a source of pride for me as a kid. And so to see me through her eyes and to know that she sees that as something that's really wonderful and lovely about her own mother is, I think, remarkable.